I think most anglers would say LiveScope has had a major impact on bass fishing and tournament bass fishing in the last couple of years. Some say positive, some for the worse. Either way, it has been very controversial to say the minimum. Every year I track the stats of the baits and the techniques I use, bass landed and weighed in for my tournament seasons. This time I am taking it one step further. I'm going to compare my stats to the 2 years prior to me owning LiveScope and then the 2 years most recent having it on my boat for my tournament and fishing seasons. I really want to understand the impact that front-facing sonar has had on my tournament fishing and baits used and techniques fished. Some of the findings surprised me and will likely be eye-opening for you, so stay tuned. Quick glance at my 21 season. Now, I did a whole other video on this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you can kind of see it was heavily impacted by Texas rigs, jigs, power fishing, just 5% spinning rods. That 21 recap Type 5 baits, right? It's Carolina rigs, Speed Craw, Texas rigs, the old chatterbait, Bass Tech jigs, flipping, and the frog was a major player in 2021. 2022, similar breakdown, got video on this as well. Did use the spinning rod a little bit more in 2022. Top 22, top 5 baits. We're breezing through 21 and 22. We'll come back to these and kind of sum them up in the end and how they compare. But the jerkbait was a new player in 22-22 for me. Still Texas rigs, stick baits, Ned rigs kind of made a play. So finesse, that's where that spinning rod comes in. Flipping jigs, still a mainstay for me, season in, season out. And then because of the smallmouth venues we went to, the Stupid Tube played a big role in 2022. So getting into 2023, which I actually didn't do a video on, so we're going to slow down here. 11 events over 14 tournament days, so a few multi-day events in there. I weighed a 66 out of a possible 70 bass, so I had limits in all but 2 days of tournament competition. I only cashed checks in 3 events, which not really up to my standards. Did have a good season on the Team of the Year and the TBF Team Trail with partner Michael. 15% of my fish came on spinning rods. Only fished the TBF semis, no bass regionals or nationals made that year. First year with LiveScope. I got it super late in 2022, used it a couple times before I put the boat away, and this was the first time I really had it on the boat in conjunction with Mega 360. I only weighed one fish all tournament season in 14 days on a fish that I actually saw on the LiveScope, cast it and caught it. Now, I caught more fish than that, but only one that actually was weighed in during the tournament season. And that was a smallmouth on Lake Alexander in a team tournament. That was our last call of the day. So that's less than 2% of the fish all season long. And it was a season dominated by largemouth, where we had 83% largemouth weighed on those 11 tournaments. So top 5 baits, a lipless crankbait. That kind of took the place of the jerkbait. A lot of river fish, lipless crankbait played good. A 6 cents quake and a Thunderhawk Sergeant. Jerkbait still was a thing in some of those spring events. Finesse definitely stepped up here. Drop shot, finesse, jig worms, drop shot, and then also I started dabbling with the core tackle hover rig, and I had some good events with that and caught some key fish largely due to that. Hollow body frogs, still big players, the Spro 65 and the Mad Max. And then rose to number one, kind of highlighting that number 2 spot the last couple of years was the Bass Tech tungsten jig, Arsenal swim jig combo. Fished those with Menace Scrubs and Speed Craws as trailers, and they put a lot of the fish and the majority of the fish in the boat for the year. So going into 2024, second year with LiveScope, 8 events over 15 tournament days. So a lot of multi-day events, 2 single-day team events. So the rest of them, the other 6 events were solo pro-am style events. They were multi-day events that averaged 191 boats per tournament, with most of them being over 200 boats. So definitely a step up fishing, Bass Nation Regionals, the National Championship, the Bass Opens, Division 3. So definitely a shift in the tournaments that I fished. Those prior years, the average boat field was probably somewhere between 20 and 40 boats per event. So a big step up in competition. Weighed 76 out of possible 80 bass, limits all but 2 days all year long, except for Grand Lake, which stymied me. We only got three fish per day at Grand Lake. Cast checks in 4 of the 8 events, which is 50%. I still want to do better than that, but did get a local team win on Lake Minnetonka. A 25% spinning rod, qualified for the 2025 Bass Nation National Championship, so that's nice. We already got that set for next year. Second year with LiveScope on the boat. So this tournament year, 12 fish out of the 76 were weighed via front-facing sonar. Now, most of those came on Lake St. Clair, where almost every fish came on LiveScope. So that was 10 of them right there. The other ones were kind of sprinkled in throughout the year. And that's about 16% of the total catch. And you can see the minnow makes an appearance for the first time ever, accounting for 4% of the fish for the entire year. So that being said, let's look at the transition. This was a 54% largemouth schedule, so there was a lot of smallmouth, spinning rod, and some of these other things. A lot of this has to do with venues and where you fish on, and how that on your season unfolds in some of your bait selection. So the top 24 baits for the season: frogs, number 5. So even being LiveScope, it was a top 5 bait for me. Texas rig, speed cross, Carolina rigs, right up there. Drop shot finesse played. We had a lot of smallmouth venues, Lake St. Clair, things like that. The Bass Tech Tungsten Jig and the Horseshoe Finesse Jig had a ton of key events, and then the Tube back to the number 1 spot, and that was largely based on the Lake Vermilion tournament and the River tournament and focusing on smallmouth. Now let's talk about how those 21 through 22 compares to 23 to 24 side by side. So no scope versus scope. 2 years of tournament angling before front-facing sonar and 2 years with LiveScope. Some key takeaways from this: jigs remain steady and unwavered through my tournament baits. You can see that consistently, almost a quarter, 25% year over year, the jig is a main player for me, and that never changed. Only 9% of the fish were scoped in the last 2 years when I had LiveScope. So that there was an increase from 23 to 24, but I think that was more about the venue and having Lake St. Clair, and I guess me becoming a little more proficient with it. We saw a 14% to 21% increase in spinning rod usage pre-LiveScope through LiveScope. But again, I think that has more of a shift in just overall electronics, fishing pressure, more shifts to drop shot, dabbling with the hover rigs, things like that. I don't think you can put that all on front-facing sonar. Drop shot and finesse definitely displaced a bit of my Texas rig. And again, I think that could be more about venues and fishing pressure. The jerkbait and minnow combined stayed about 7% across all 4 years. Frog catch percentage nearly doubled in the 2 years with scope versus not having scope. So I think that's interesting. And that shows you how much more like venue influence and fishing tournaments on the Mississippi River and Leech Lake and things like that influence it more than possibly the scope. Stickworm, wacky worm dropped off by about 60%, but I think that's more of a shift in the tactics. I think that's where the rise in the drop shot came up, displaced some of that stickworm, wacky worm fishing. Pre-scope, 50% checks over 2 years and 2 wins. With scope, 37% check and 1 win. But I think a lot of that is field size and level of competition. I do think in the last 2 years, better electronics has shifted me offshore a bit more and made me dabble a little bit more off the bank. That could be just mapping 360, better side imaging, the whole thing. Just getting in the new boat, setting up new electronics, things like that. But the small changes in bait trends have more to do. So I do think we see some shifts here to, the minnow makes an appearance. We see a little more finesse, but I think that's more about bait trends, the venues and the tournaments I fished, right? We had some bed fishing events where I leveraged the drop shot quite a bit, sight fishing, St. Clair, obviously dominated by smallmouth, things like that. I'd love to hear what you guys think. What are you seeing in your fishing? If you have LiveScope, has it dramatically changed you? For me, it hasn't changed me as an angler a ton. Honestly, the results kind of surprising to see that it stayed very steady. I kind of stayed true as an angler. Although I feel like I'm learning a ton using front-facing sonar, becoming a better angler, learning more about bass, and it's a great learning tool on my boat. If you want to see my win from this year, no LiveScope needed whatsoever, check this video on the screen right here next.
Oh, yep.